But my first question to all of our panelists is, what was the impetus for you to put yourselves on the front line in this struggle? Kathleen and Danny, I'd love to hear what you felt your impetus was, your initial impetus. And there's Mike, there he is.
Well, in reality,
We got the mic, sorry.
in reality, the impetus, in my case, I had joined SNCC. I mean, I've been wanting to join SNCC for a long time, but by the time I got to do it, which was here in New York, and I went to their office, it was 2 weeks after Stokely had made the call for Black Power. So I joined an organization that was in the process of getting committed to Black Power. I was, and I met people who were involved with the Black Panther Party. I was in the Black Power movement and ended up moving out to California in November of 1967, which was approximately about 4 or 5 weeks after Huey Newton was in an altercation and ended up wounded, in prison, charged with murder, policeman dead, and he was facing the gas chamber. I'm in a Black Power movement. I'm engaged to the leader of the Black Panther Party, who said, it's more important for me to save Huey's life than to keep myself on parole. So he was risking his parole, which meant going back to prison. Huey had already risked his life. Bobby Seale and other Panthers were in jail. There was about 5 of us. And he said, we got to get Huey out. So the impetus was actually a man who had started a revolutionary movement in the Black Power moment, 1967, who was facing the gas chamber. So we said, okay, let's do it, you know. It's free Huey. Well, the media coverage at the time of Stokely Carmichael's activity in the Black Power era was extraordinarily twisted. And they tried to make him seem all sorts of things. They wanted to expose your arrest, talk about you like a dog, and they're trying to get him. Even one congressman said, he should be the subject of retroactive birth control. I mean, it was terrible. This is when he was down in Cuba. And so the way they tried to demonize and isolate the information you could get from Stokely or any of us was horrendous. However, in Sweden, the government policy towards what was going on in the United States was entirely different. In fact, they were quite curious, and they could let cameramen go anywhere and talk to anyone and do whatever they wanted. Sweden also had a different policy about covering America. They didn't follow the U.S. views of itself or the Vietnam War. They also taught in their media, or you could read in their media, stories about what they call the other America. So this is about the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, and it wasn't with a sense of horror or fear. It was like, this is news. People were interested. They invited that footage was Stokely in Sweden, I believe. And so people were going around the world and making it clear what the Black movement was about, and it was very exciting, and Stokely was very charming and sexy and handsome, and people were attracted to this. But that wasn't allowed here. The people who were attracted were cornered off in one room, and a lot of the times the audiences would be all black, or if they were white, people would be condemned. So the whole reception in the media and in the society of who Stokely was and what he was about was entirely different. And that's what they wanted to perpetuate, like hate white people. That's what it was supposed to be about. Kill white people. This is what the FBI wanted to think these black movements were about, so that they could justify how they were abused.
I never saw this kind of footage before. I saw this film. And what was it about these young Swedish filmmakers, journalists, that allowed them that kind of access? And why would they look for that?
Because they could do what they wanted. They could do what they wanted. They were not told by their editor, do this, do that. I saw footage in this film that completely blew my mind. I don't even remember Swedish TV particularly, but in Algeria, they showed images of the building where we were. No one in America has ever seen pictures of the building of the international section of the Black Panther Party, other than a little picture in the New York Times one magazine in 1970, November 1st. That's the only picture I've ever seen. Eldridge Cleaver is supposed to be dead and gone. You can't turn on TV and hear what he has to say, but in this film, they show him saying, oh yes, we want to reach the level of the Vietnamese and make provisional revolutionary government. He said, but we haven't got there yet. And can you imagine? FBI would just not allow, because the United States was at war. That's part of it, the politics of war, the politics of anti-communism, and the fundamental, insanely psychotic level of white supremacist madness that we were being subjected to. And apparently, somehow or other, they saw it didn't affect us, that we were not responsive. We didn't go along with white supremacy. In fact, we challenged it very openly and condemned it and made fun of it, as Stokely did. And we had a whole movement around the country and around the world that's repudiating it. So this probably, in the context of the Vietnam War, in the context of their own sense of being disrespected, you know, the names that they got called, et cetera, might have had something to do with how they responded to this. But also it intimidates the press and intimidates people, and they're afraid. They're afraid to get to know these people.
Kathleen, I'd love you to talk a little bit about the women of the movement. I mean, we know about Angela. We know that you were the first female leader within the party.
No, that's not true. The first one was Joanne Mitchell, who was actually a student at San Francisco State and the BSU. She was the women's captain. I became on the Central Committee, but she was the women's captain before there was a Central Committee. And, you know, this idea of leaders, the movement, the civil rights movement in the South was mobilized, organized, dominated by the activities of women. And the men who are spokesmen are designated leaders, and they are written about in the press, and they go to meetings, but they don't actually reveal, that doesn't actually reveal the way the movements evolve. You know, when you put the term leaders, then people sort of unconsciously want to see a male. But that doesn't mean that all the work and all the leadership and all the education and all the programming and wasn't done by quite a few women. And in the Black Panther Party, the people who started it, two guys started it, Bobby Seale, Huey Newton, but then as time went on and more men got arrested and more cases, it got to the point where the majority of actual live, on-the-ground Panthers were women. And so I think there's no major effort in the larger society to understand what radical movements are about, and there's definitely no larger movement to understand what leadership of black women is about. That doesn't mean it's not there, but that means it's discounted. Well, the movement that I joined, the Black Power movement, evolved out of the civil rights movement in the Deep South. And in the Deep South, many of the leaders were actually women. They weren't given that title, but the Organization of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, was actually created or started. The conference was called by Ella Baker, who was on the staff of the SCLC, and she was essentially the inspiration and the mentor, and she allowed the leadership within that youth organization called Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to mature and develop. And by the time I moved to California, the fall of '67, there was a woman who had been elected the executive secretary, Ruby Doris Robinson, very, very well-acknowledged leader. I remember seeing pictures of her in Ebony magazine with her microphone, and she was a leader of the Sojourner Motor Fleet in Mississippi, summer '64. I was so impressed. I mean, it was so inspiring to see young people, young women, young men working together, challenging these sheriffs, going to jail, singing in the paddy wagons, going on these buses that got burned up. Diane Nash was the leader of the freedom rides. And so this notion of being a revolutionary, being a radical, being a woman, they weren't inconsistent. However, I will say a large part of the American population had not yet been educated to the fact that there was this leadership within women. And so when they see the organizations, they don't see the leadership because it's coming out of a tradition that they're not familiar with.
Absolutely, you know.
We have some questions from the audience now, and I'm going to start off with one that I know is from a student of ours, Ms. Alexandra Salazar. She asked, it is clear that activism has changed over the years. It seems as if it has become more individually based. How do you think we can make it collective once again?
Well, first of all, the problems that any activist is attempting to address are collective problems. If you have individually based solutions, they're not going to work. Mm-hmm. So just first of all, be realistic, and secondly, regroup and learn organizing, not posturing, not rattling off things out of your head, organizing, putting together people in a group or a motion of some sort where they participate collectively in making choices and in implementing their decisions.
Here's another question. Says that we made a comment in the beginning that we're removed, several generations removed from the movement, yet the struggle still continues. My question is, what advice, direction, and or request do you have of young people today in terms of continuing and or honoring that struggle?
What I think is problematic is that the level of activism that's underway and has been, let's say, for over the last 15, 20 years is not well understood and not well known. If you live in an area where there is a big environmental justice movement, then you hear about it because you live there. Right. But if you live 6 states away, exactly, you don't even know it exists. Right. So you make the assumption it's not existing. Right. So there's a communications issue and a reluctance or a hostility in the larger media to show anything that involves collective action involving young people, young black people, but sometimes they have to show it, like the protest in Jena, Louisiana. They couldn't not show it. Right. All right. But
and we're finally hearing 3 weeks later in mainstream press about the Nigerian girls being kidnapped. 3 weeks later, yes. This is a question from a documentary filmmaker doing a doc on a black homeless veteran who says that slavery is alive and well in America today. He believes that black folks needs to look inside themselves and not at white folks to tell them who they are. Your thoughts?
I'd just like to comment. I passed a man on the street this afternoon. He had a sign that said, homeless veteran, please give me whatever you can for food. And I walked past him. I thought about it. I said, this is insane. And so I went up to him. I found some dollars, singles, and I said, I'm sorry, this is all I have, but this is crazy. He told me that 75% of the homeless in New York are veterans. That tells you something about the level of lack of incoherence, lack of compassion, lack of reality in the government that we have. Okay, if 75% of the homeless in New York City are veterans, and one of them's, and they're begging for money. This is crazy. So, the VA, of course, we know is a disaster. But what I wanted to get at is the manner in which we access information and we participate in communities has been radically altered by the politics of this country. Back in the time when the Black Panthers and the radicals and all these different groups were percolating up, the United States was not the #1 total leader of the world. The United States was in competition. There was a war undergoing between people who were on the capitalist side and people who were against the capitalist side. It was called the Vietnam War, and it went on for quite some time. And it ended in Vietnam becoming its independent country as it should have been. But that was many, many years ago, and at this point there is no opposition to the world domination of the economic system of the United States. And that alters entirely how people can function within this country and how they think and how they respond to each other. We have to get out of this one world, whatever it is. What was Bush's thing? New World Order. We got to get out of and behind this new world ugly order to get to a better order where we can communicate and do something to solve the problems that we actually have.
I think I'll take one more of the questions from the audience because this is a really good one. It's about coalition building. And it says that many of us are trying to work between coalitions like at the New School, like the Students for Justice in Palestine. Students of the African diaspora, SOAD, you're here, good. And the Feminist Collective. However, we are having trouble getting folks to believe that these struggles can constitute each other. How do we get people to see that and believe that?
Well, it's a challenge of organizing, but it's also a form of community building. You will organize and talk to people that you know because you sat down and you ate lunch, or you went for a walk, or you're in a class. I mean, it's kind of hard to organize with strangers. So you have to form connections and build alliances and build relationships in the process of developing political challenges. And that's very, very key, because if you don't do that, your little political challenges just don't go anywhere. And I'm sure some of you have had that experience. Well, I just like to say people have to believe that they can do this. Jim Foreman used to always say, and I admired him immensely. He was my first mentor in SNCC. I never worked so hard in my life. The first weekend I got to Atlanta, I don't think I slept but 3 hours in the whole weekend, taking notes with Jim Foreman's meeting, and really SNCC was in chaos, collapsing. And so, but what I was going to say is you have to be able to believe in yourself, believe what you want to do, and know, like Jim Foreman used to always say, we will win without a doubt. I said, yeah, but Jim, but when? So we have to put when off the table and believe that we can win. If we don't win, you could be sure this is a country going down the tubes, a little fascist hole in the future.